You're listening to the Parent Pod Podcast by Gymboree Play and Music with Adonica Shaw, a weekly conversation about early childhood development topics for parents with children ages 0 to 5. While the content of this show is meant to be informative, it is not meant to replace the guidance of your physician, therapist, or pediatrician.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Parent Pod Podcast. I'm your host, Adonica Shaw, and today I'm talking to America's funniest dad, Greg Schwem. Greg can't stop laughing about his kids and what it's like to be a parent. As a 30-year stand-up comedy veteran, Greg has traveled the world entertaining Fortune 500 companies, hilariously documenting the flaws of business and technology. But invariably, he's found himself talking about his daughters on stage, including their 100% devotion to text messaging, their desires to document their entire lives via social media, and, of course, their American Girl doll phase. Now, his experiences also became the frequent fodder of his weekly humor column, nationally syndicated by the Tribune Content Agency. Reeling early on that parenting requires the skills of a corporate executive, it seemed only natural to create Funny Dad Inc. Parents spend a few minutes on this site laughing and related, and Greg promises it's going to be easier to navigate than Snapchat. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adonica. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. You know, I love that you've got this really diverse and really well-balanced bio, but I'm pretty sure there's probably a lot more to you and your background than what I was able to capture in that introduction. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience about you and how this whole dad influencer slash comedy angle to your career came about?
Sure. Well, I started my career as a journalist, and I was a newspaper and then a TV reporter, but I had been dabbling in stand-up since I was in high school. And eventually I just decided I liked doing stand-up better than, I always say I like making people laugh more than I like depressing them, which is what I was doing every night as a journalist. So I quit my job as a TV reporter. I decided I wanted to try stand-up full-time. And eventually I kind of branched off into doing shows for big business groups, big conventions, corporations, for, like you said, Fortune 500 companies. I started to get hired by them because I was doing a lot of material about computers and technology on stage. And I work very clean, which is what the corporate environment wants. So they started hiring me. And eventually, as I said, I stopped doing comedy clubs and I just do these conventions. But the Funny Dad Inc. came across because I, at the same time, was with my wife raising two daughters. And I was doing a lot of material, both the spoken word on stage and the written word in my blogs and in my Chicago Tribune column about my kids. And eventually I thought, well, I should just kind of invent a whole nother website. So that's why I developed Funny Dad Inc. And the Inc. was the whole idea of you combine, it's that parenting is a business. That's why I called it Funny Dad Inc. So the website is the funny business of parenting. And I have actually written several blog articles that kind of combine the two. If I see something, like I wrote one not too long ago about the governor of Texas who had just signed a law making it okay for kids to have lemonade stands because these two kids in Texas a couple of years ago got cited by the police for not having a permit to run their lemonade stand. And I read that, I'm like, this is perfect. So any of those kind of things.
I didn't know that you needed a permit to have a lemonade stand. I remember.
Yeah, well, apparently this town in Texas, you do. And again, the Governor Greg Abbott, got wind of that, and he couldn't believe it. So yeah, these kids were cited, and I ended up calling the mom, and she posted about it on Facebook, and we had a nice chat, and that made for a great blog article.
Oh my goodness. It's interesting how much things have changed, I'd say, over the last, I want to say it's 10, 15 years, but even this year, things have changed so quickly. And so by the time my children are grown and have children of their own, they're going to have something different to say for nearly every week of 2020. And I almost don't even blame them. Now, one thing I know that we talked a little bit about before we started recording for this episode, and I know that I found out about offline, was that you actually used to have your children in Gymboree playing music classes. I know it's probably a little different than our classes are now, but what was the experience like back then, and what were the benefits for you and your family?
Well, it was a hoot. I mean, first of all, it was mostly my wife that did the Gymboree classes. And again, I was traveling a lot, but there were a couple of times where either she was gone and I was home, and I said, hey, I'd like to go. And I remember I took another dad with me because it was my daughter and another kid.
Father to go. Okay.
I don't think that's allowed anymore. I think
it's definitely allowed. I think it almost might be rare, but
yes, exactly.
Continue. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm curious about this story.
Yeah, well, there was actually two. Okay, so one, and I felt kind of bad about this because the instructor of Gymboree somehow knew that I was a stand-up comedian. I don't know how she found out. I didn't tell her. Maybe my wife did. But she said to me, she goes, I'd like to come see you sometime. And I said, sure. At the time I was still doing comedy clubs, and there was a club called Zany's in downtown Chicago, which is still there. And I said, yeah, I'm going to be here in about 6 weeks. And she goes, oh, I'm coming, and I'm bringing some friends, and I cannot wait to hear your stories about Gymboree. And I think she went away very disappointed because I didn't have any. I had parenting stories, but I didn't have any stories or jokes specifically about Gymboree. And I think she thought I was going to be I think she thought I was going to be talking all about her. And she sat up front and everything. And I remember just looking at her like, gosh, I hope you're not bummed out by this. So that was one. And then this was a story that actually did make it into my stand-up, because as a comedian, we're all very sarcastic. But I remember there was a moment in Gymboree class where you had like organized activities and songs and so forth. And at the end of the class, there were like 10 or 15 minutes left, and it was like open play. So I'm sure that still goes on. Yeah. So you kind of do anything with your kids. You could run them through the tunnels or anything. And I just remember there was this mom who like got all these little hoops out, and she put them right in the middle of the room. And then she was saying to her son, okay, Justin, or whatever his name is, okay, go to the blue hoop, go to the red hoop, go to the yellow hoop. And she was saying it just loud enough so like all the parents would know, ooh, your kid knows his colors and mine doesn't. and I almost wanted to call her out on that. Like, okay, lady, your kid's smarter than my kid. You've made that very clear. My daughter's wiping her nose on one of the pieces of equipment or something. But you know what? She turned out just fine, if the lady with the hoops is listening.
Oh, my God.
How'd your kid turn out?
Well, what's interesting? I would say that Gymboree playing music offers just a really unique environment for kids to explore and learn and play. And so the great part of it.
That's why we loved it. And that's why my wife bought all the clothes, too.
Oh my goodness. Well, it sounds like you guys were definitely, diehard Gymboree playing music brand parents and followers. So, thank you for, I would say.
Oh, yeah. Do you know both of my kids who are now 23 and 18, and this is true, both of them still have their Gymboree blankets.
Oh.
I should have said that right off the top. They do. They have those colorful, very soft blankets. Even my 23-year-old still has hers. And I don't know if she sleeps with it, but she still has it. It's a part of her childhood that will never, ever go away. And that's really that's a real compliment to your organization.
Well, thank you. It's been interesting because from time to time, people will send us pictures of items that we used to have like a long time ago. I know back in, what was it, the 80s, 90s, the big thing, or, it's not really exciting now, but when the Gymboree brand came out with the socks that had the grips on the bottom of them.
Oh, yeah.
it was like, whoa, socks with grips,
High-tech socks. Yes.
Yeah. And so just to see some of the products and things that people have held on to over the years has been really interesting. Plus, our classes have changed a bit. And so the way our Jimbo looks now is different than how Jimbo looked before. And then we used to also have Jim Bell, and the programming was situated a little different depending upon what year you've come into any of our locations. Yeah. So for me, it's just quite interesting to see some of the things people send in. I think it might be cool one day to do like a scavenger hunt and see what things from Gymboree playing music that people have been hiding at home and which things that they never let their kids touch.
Right.
Because I feel like as parents, we buy those things. We're like, you're never going to touch this. It's going to be worth $5 million one day. Don't look at it. Don't even breathe in the direction of the item.
Exactly. Well, if it's any consolation to those who have that, still have that mindset, my wife is right outside in our garage right now planning the yearly garage sale, which starts tomorrow. And you're more than welcome to come by and purchase all of that stuff that we just described.
Oh my goodness.
Except the blankets. Those ain't going out.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad you guys are going to hold on to those. Now, I know that you do comedy for, different types of environments, different companies. And I love the fact that it's clean. Mm-hmm. But in terms of parenting, what are some of the funniest things that you've been able to convey on stage? I think, right now we're in a pandemic. Everybody is having a very different experience with it. And so
right.
I know you probably get this line a lot, but can you tell us a joke?
Oh, well, it's funny because as my kids grow, there's always something, even though they're older now. I mean, my youngest one just graduated high school. So I just wrote a bunch of jokes, but she virtually graduated this year. And for anybody listening who's got a son or daughter in the class of 2020, you were introduced to that phrase, virtual graduation, whether you liked it or not. And I said, once I found out she would be virtually graduating, I said to my daughter, so you're telling me instead of sitting in a hot, sweaty gym, I can sit on my own couch and listen to your name get mispronounced. And which by the way, did happen. So whatever's going on in their lives has made it into my act. When they were, I know that your kids, I think we talked about this earlier, played soccer, and I told a story years ago of my daughter's soccer team, and they had the picnic at the end, and they said in the email, they said, we're going to have a parent soccer game. And I read that like, oh, that sounds kind of fun. Sign me up. We're going to be there'll be a couple of beers in there, and I'll just sort of kick the ball around in my flip-flops and so forth. And I got to the picnic, and they said, okay, all the parents who signed up for the parent soccer game, if you could all meet over here. And I see parents start going over there. And I mean, we live in a very ethnically diverse neighborhood, and all of a sudden I'm seeing like uniforms come on, like they're peeling off their shirts they wore to the picnic, and underneath is the Irish national team jersey. and that's not like one of them, Adonica. That's all of them. And
wow,
it kind of had this look like we are now going to show you how soccer is really played, because we've been watching it on the sidelines for 3 months, and these Americans have no idea how to coach it. And I started to see this. I go, if I am in this soccer game, I'm going to get killed. So I think once I was halfway over to the field, I think I accidentally got a leg cramp or something and thought,
oh, no.
Maybe I won't play. I'll just watch. And I'm not kidding. The ball dropped, and these parents, and I'm talking moms too, were sliding into one another and taking each other out and having a great time doing it. So yeah, that was a story too.
Oh my goodness. I feel like it's interesting because, as parents, whether, you're in a class with your child or you're watching them play a game, there's all of these things that we're kind of calculating in our head. Like, if I could just get in there and help you just do it this way, or like,
right, exactly,
you're
exactly.
perfecting.
I mean, you live in California. I'm sure you're used to that as well. There's 7 different languages being screamed on the sidelines.
I know, and it's quite interesting. To your earlier point about being in one of our classes and then maybe having your own unique experience with different parents. I think there's this desire that we all have that we want to make our child armed with the information or armed with the skill set to be competitive, and no matter what arena that they're in. And so whether it's knowing colors or getting away with slide tackling, which I'm pretty sure kids can't do.
Probably not, but trust me, there were no rules at this picnic.
Oh yeah, but it's just one of those competitive things, I think, that just as humans we have in our nature to want to be the best and to perform at our highest, and so it's quite unique about the fact that you can be in an environment like Gymboree playing music, but then by the time the children are older and they're playing soccer or doing other things, it's still a very similar environment, so to speak. And so starting with us, it's like, okay, this is the warm up. This is the warm up for what's to come. It gets more competitive from here, I assure you. Now, I know that, you are constantly probably talking about things that are funny and things that you're able to, I hate to say make light of, but I would imagine that there are some very serious things that you've endured as a parent. Have there been any curveballs that you've had to deal with that you can speak to us about, and how you've actually had to handle them?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things is obviously my travel schedule, and I've missed a lot growing up, or see my kids growing up, and I haven't always been there for birthdays and those kind of things. But the thing about it is I started doing stand-up comedy and chose this lifestyle before I had children. So my kids always grew up around it, and we always tried to turn what Dad does for a living into a positive as opposed to a negative. As I said, I wasn't always there for every single birthday or celebration that they had, but as a corporate entertainer, I do a lot of shows in Orlando, and my kids have been to Disney World probably more than should be legally allowed. So there's some nice fringe benefits to doing what I do. But I think I've always just tried to incorporate some humor into any curveballs that we've had. I mean, I've had, obviously, like any family, my daughters have had some health issues, as all parents go through. Your kids every now and then have something that goes wrong with them, and so forth. And really right now we're dealing with one because my youngest one was supposed to go off to college on we talked about sports. She was planning to go off on a volleyball scholarship, and we just found out this week that they've canceled the whole season. And that was definitely a curveball, because then we had to decide, what is she going to do? And we have a plan B. She's going to take a gap year and come back strong, hopefully. It's weird. Anytime you talk about plans nowadays, it always includes the word hopefully.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing this fall? Well, we're planning to go to the cabin, hopefully. So, there's always curveballs, but I think humor certainly makes the curveballs move a little less.
Yeah, no, I would say that, one of the interesting parts of this, to your point, is you always have to add that hopefully in there, because you do recognize that they can change, but then even having little ears around you, you don't want to always be as transparent about the fact that you don't know. Because I think that's part of the, I know it's kind of funny. It's kind of part of the joy of being the parent, because all of your life you're like, when I get older, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And then you kind of have this idea or this thought in your mind that you really have control over the way your children experience life, and how they are going to go to this school, and they're going to have this teacher, and they're going to do this activity, and they're going to learn this by this age. And after that, they're going to go to a prestigious school, and then they're going to get into the best career. And then to suddenly be in this place where parents don't really have that ability to be that anchor, for themselves, let alone their children.
Yeah.
Has just been a little scary. And so sometimes now I think when we say that, hopefully it's because we want to make sure that our kids are calm. But I mean, honestly, I'm like, sometimes because I want to make sure I'm calm too.
Right. We're freaking out too. What's interesting about the age of my kids, though, especially like the one that's going off to college and the one that's now in her early 20s, but who grew up with, me as a comedian and so forth, is the older kids get, the more they have a better understanding of what's going on around them. And I've said to my kids, I go, you are going to be part of the solution, or you're going to have to be part of the solution to this. Mm-hmm. Younger kids, the ones that are 10 and 5, I mean, they're like, oh, really? We're going to start another school year learning in front of a computer. I mean, they just don't get it, that this is how much the world has changed in 5 months. And that's rough. That's rough. I know if you're a parent trying to have to explain that, but on the flip side, I've told my kids, you may have to go out and invent something new, or a new way to do this. The way of studying in a dorm or going to college parties might be over forever. Now, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I think the hardest part, or the part that I'm trying to figure out and navigate, I know the virtual school has been interesting, but I'm like, okay, I can figure that out to a certain extent, but whereas before, even if you homeschooled, you had the ability to go into a classroom. And so that other social learning, the cognitive development, and the things that really do take place when you're in an environment with other people that may have different lifestyles, that may have different developmental levels, where you're challenged and forced to think through certain situations or have critical thought around information that's being presented to you that's different than what you would have gotten otherwise. It's how do you supplement that, right? Because that's kind of the cool part of going to that first year of college. It's like you get there and you realize that you don't know anything.
Or anybody.
And you end up in this room full of strangers, and everybody's got their own unique perspective, and you either, figure out if you're going to defend your values and your upbringing, or if you're going to bend on them a little bit, or if you're going to take in information and decide later, whatever it's going to be. That experience is no different than, being 4 or 5 and going into a Gymboree class, or being in grade school and walking into your class and trying to figure out, like, all right, well, how does the hierarchy on the playground work? Like, who's a tetherball champ? And like, who shoots the most hoops? I have an 8-year-old, and for him, the big thing was always like, who's the fastest kid in first grade, or who's the fastest kid in second grade? And was he it? And did other people think that he was the fastest?
Who's the it kid in second grade?
Yeah, but then when they don't have those comparisons to make anymore, it suddenly becomes purely about themselves, and then the parent trying to help guide their sense of resilience or character purely from their own understanding, which is wonderful. But I also recognize that the world that I grew up in is dramatically different than the ones that my children are growing up in, the ones that your daughters are going to grow up in just as young adults, and then going into whatever corporate America looks like at that point, right?
Exactly.
It may not be interning for a summer somewhere and then getting hired on, or trying a bunch of different places at once. It may be that they have to make that decision earlier on because the opportunity to switch environments just may not be available to them, Yeah, no, I apologize. I feel like we got off on this tangent about parenting and quarantine, but I do think it's a much needed conversation right now. My best to your daughter, I know that can be difficult to be young and, have everything set up, and then it's like life happens and you have to kind of adjust and figure out what comes next.
Yes, exactly. Especially when you're being recruited heavily and everybody's kind of telling you exactly what you want to hear. I mean, that's what college recruiting is all about. Everybody's telling you you're the best, and you're the greatest, and this school can't function without you, and this team can't function without you. And you get that, and then you decide all of a sudden, boom! Oh, by the way, everything's canceled.
Yeah, and I think it will be really interesting to see how kids, and I hate to say kids because I know that she's not quote unquote a kid, but she's your kid.
Right.
How they respond to this, and what those character traits really look like for this up and coming generation 6 months from now. a year from now, because their trials and tribulations and the way that they are going to develop and grow is going to be dramatically different than anything we've ever seen before. Mm-hmm. I have just two more questions for you, because I know we're getting to the end of the episode. The first is, do you have any recommendation for books that parents can read, even if it's your own, if you have your own project that you'd like to tell parents about, that can help them find some comedic relief in parenting?
Right. And I am going to plug my own book. I'm sorry, but you opened the door and you said it's okay if I do. So, because I never read parenting books growing up. I just thought I would end up growing up when I became a dad, because I just thought it would confuse me more. But I wrote a book, and it's about 10 years old, but it's still very relevant. It's called Text Me If You're Breathing: Observations, Frustrations, and Life Lessons from a Low-Tech Dad. And I wrote it because I saw a lot of humor in this high-tech world, because my kids were being introduced to things before I was. They were, all of a sudden, Facebook popped up, and then Twitter popped up, and then having your own phone when you were 11 popped up. And I saw all this, and I thought, I have got to get out ahead of this. I'm behind the curve. I can't be behind the curve of an 8-year-old. I have to learn about this stuff, and the best way for me to explain it would be comedically. So I wrote Text Me If You're Breathing, and it's been a wonderful source. A lot of people have asked me about it and said, I laughed really hard at that. And it goes into, everything is in raising a kid is high tech now. I mean, there's a story, there's a chapter on a high-tech swing set. My wife we had both kids via in vitro fertilization, both of them. You don't think there's technology involved in that? So before we even had children, we were already in the high-tech thing. So that would be, if anybody just wants to laugh and just take a break and say that all parents are going through the same thing, check out that book.
Oh, that's tremendous. Thank you. And you know what? Like I said, I'm all for self-promotion, because, I think everybody is an expert in their own right. And Indeed. If you've got information that other people don't have, that makes you the voice of it. And so I think certainly why not? I think that there's a great opportunity for you to let guests know more about what it is that you have to offer. And, hopefully they will get some laughs in there as well, because I'm sure we can all use them about now. And then my final question to you is, how can they find you?
Yeah, well, I have two websites that people might want to look at. Number one is my comedy business website, and that's gregschwem.com, GregSchwem.com. And then you can also read some of the stuff that I've written about my kids and some videos that I've made about parenting issues, and that's at Funny Dad Inc., funnydadinc.com. So either one of those, by all means, check them out. And I've enjoyed keeping those websites current and active. And when stuff comes out in the news or so forth that I think can relate to my kids, you're going to see it on Funny Dad Inc.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for your time today and for your expertise and for your stories. I think, like I said, I want to maybe start this Gymboree scavenger hunt. I'm curious to see what the condition of these blankets look like that you guys have.
You know what? When we're done, I'm going to shoot you an email, and it's just kind of for your own personal thing, but it's going to have 2 photos in there, and you will get to see a little bit about how Gymboree impacted our lives. That's all I'll tell you.
Awesome. Thank you. For those of you that are at home listening to this episode, thank you so much for taking the time to engage with us today. We recognize that you can be doing anything with your time, but we do appreciate that you decide to spend it with us and listening to this very interesting, funny, and upbeat conversation. Now, if you have any questions or feedback about things that we've discussed here, feel free to sound up on social media with the Parent Pod hashtag or the Gymboree Play and Music hashtag. You can also mention either the Gymboree Play and Music company or our guest here online, and we will do our best to address any of your questions or get back to you if you have questions about the episode. So until next time, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Parent Pod.
To learn more about this week's episode or the content discussed in the episode, be sure to follow Gymboree Play and Music on Facebook.